pleasure of hearing the story of our friend and neighbor, Beverly Shipka. A little background on Beverly. Beverly was born and raised in the Chicago, Illinois area. She earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Beloit College in Wisconsin and a master's degree in marketing and quantitative business practices, whatever that is, from the University of Arizona. Beverly enjoyed a 37-year career in a variety of industries: advertising, government, and the airline industry. Beverly loves to travel, and she has visited all 7 continents and over 120 countries. She's been involved in numerous organizations, including past president of the Travel and Tourism Research Association, past chair of the Air Transport Association, chair of the Dallas Economic Club, World Trade Organization, and much more. As you know, Beverly is a mover and a shaker. And we are glad to have her here at Tide Point. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Beverly Shipka.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Now, I'm going to start in the beginning, but not too far in the beginning. I guess my love for working in the business career started growing up at home, because Dad would come home from the company and talk about what was going on and all the issues, and then they would entertain the executive committee at dinners at the house. And I just grew up in this environment, and it was exciting to me. So my first summer, I went to work. The company was Denoyer Geppert Company, and it was founded by Mr. Denoyer, who was a professor and a cartographer. And this was in the late 1890s. And at that time, schools didn't have many visual aids for the whole class to see. So he decided he needed a company to make globes and then wall charts of the continents and the planet. And then Mr. Geppert was his pal, and they formed the company. And when those 2 folks retired, Dad took over. Now, heretofore, before Mr. Denoyer, we had called Mercato Projection. And what that did was just flatten the globe from 3-dimensional to 2. So you see, the further you got from the equator, Greenland is bigger than South America. So he came up with the semi-elliptical, which put the continents in their proper perspective. So he was pretty well known in the Chicago area. And this was the map room that I visited when I worked there, and I was just amazed at the number of people making maps and globes, which were there. And that was presented to my dad when he joined the company in the early 30s. And I still have this one here in my house, and it's definitely a treasure. That was the original building, and it was declared a historic landmark, so it couldn't be torn down. And it was made into condos, and they called it map lofts. And they kept the name, and they also kept the original maps in the lobby, which I thought Dad would be so proud of that. So another part of what they did was 3D anatomical models: heart, spine, body parts, and then they put together skeletons, and they got the bones from India. And I remember Dad talking about the difficulty he had getting them through customs. And he said they were bleached, sanitized, but anyway, he did, and I saw them put together the skeleton. So now it's time to go to college. And I chose Beloit College. It's a small liberal arts college in the Midwest Conference, and it includes Monmouth, where Maggie Posey went. It also includes Lawrence College, where Mr. Denoyer went. So it had a good academic record, and I was a great student for the first 2.5 years. Then I discovered the party scene, and of course I embraced it 100%. The grades took a dive, and I had to look for easy A courses. So one, they were telling me advertising and marketing research, an A for short. So I enrolled in that, and the professor was a hoot. He was tall, lanky, an ex-admin, and with the glasses down on his nose. And when he would make a point, he would spread his arms across the desk and say, his glasses would be down here now, he'd say, "Now class." And I don't remember his name because we called him the swooper. But he was really interesting, and so when graduation time came, I didn't know what I was going to do, and he said, "Well, why don't you work for an ad agency?" I said, "I'd like to stay in Chicago." He said, "Well, there's two great ones that I can get you an interview with, Foote Cone and Leo Burnett." So I said, "Okay, we'll do that." So my first career was in advertising. Now here I am on the interview for Foote Cone, and I'm walking down Michigan Avenue, and I'm in the big city, and oh, it's just so exciting, and here I'm the big time. And their building was on Superior, which is east of Michigan. So I turn the corner, and I see this crowd around a car. And I thought, I'm walking, and it's right now in front of the Foote Cone and building. So I go up there, and they're talking, "Oh, this is Fairfax Cone's car. Look at that. Isn't that something?" And I didn't know cars but it was a Silver Cloud Rolls Royce, 1960-something. So I went up there, and they, we chit-chat, and they said, "So where do you work?" I said, "Well, I'm here for an interview." "Oh, where?" So they took me up to where I was to be interviewed. And everybody was really friendly, and I thought, this is nice. The interview went well. The only question I remember that probably they couldn't ask today is, "Do you have any immediate marriage plans?" And I said spontaneously, "No, I do not see myself married. I always see myself working in the business field." Hired. Okay. So these were the accounts that Foote Cone had when I was there. And the four were the ones that I was in charge of for research. Now, Fairfax Cone was unique, and he had isms. One was, advertising is what you do when you can't go see the person. He was wanting to elevate the level of advertising to be very ethical, very professional, gimmick-free, just tell the story straight. So he came up with the tagline for Hallmark, "When you care enough to send the very best." And then for Lucky Strike, which was just ending when I arrived, but that was Lucky Strike means fine tobacco, LSMFT. And we did commercials for those two. Lucky Strike was the usual 30, 60-minute spots, but Hallmark Hall of Fame had a special every so often on TV. And there was a big production it wasn't really a commercial, it was a little story about how people felt so good when they got a Hallmark card. And it was, I don't know if any of you have seen Mad Men on TV, but it was just like that. There was total chaos. There were storyboards all over. There were the actors learning their lines. There were the photographers, the cameramen, and it was just electrifying. And I was just kind of on the periphery, but enjoyed every minute of that. So now, of the four accounts, Sara Lee was my favorite because they did the most research. And when they came out with a new product, it was extensive. And here, the one I worked on last was a cookie. And they had a cookie, but now they were wanting, should it be soft or crisp, nuts, no nuts, the size, and then the packaging, little package, big package, same weight, but which one would be more appealing, and then the colors. And then there was a price range, and they had a clipboard, and the consumers went through and just checked off at this long table. Then they would come over to another table, and I would lead a focus group. Now, ad agencies had a thing for titles, so anybody that led a focus group was called VP of Focus Research. So there I was leading this group. It was being recorded, and then we analyzed the results, wrote the report, made the presentation to the account exec. And I would go along the first few times with him when he presented it to the client. And then he said, "Well, why don't you present this?" And I said, "Whoa, So I did, and it went over well, and so now I'm a full-fledged ed person, and I was just up there on cloud nine. And so great work environment, great social life. We would, 5 o'clock, stream across the street to the local watering hole, invariably missed the bus to the suburbs, had to take a cab, Dad not too happy. But living at home after being away 4 years really didn't work out that well. Now, all along in the back of his mind, he was big on education, because all of the directors at the Denoyer Gepper Company had higher degrees. And he said, well, maybe you should think about graduate school. I said, I've been thinking, and I have one in mind. He said, well, so do I. He said, we're quite close to Northwestern. Why don't you go there, and then you can live at home and everything will be. I said, no. I'm going to the University of Arizona. What? So I did. Out of the house. Okay. It had a great business school, BPA, College of Business and Public Administration. And there was a professor there who was just dynamic. And he was the marketing research guru and became head of the department, later assistant to the president. And I remember telling him, why aren't you the president? He said, no, I like to pull the strings behind the scenes. Anyway, I didn't miss one of his classes. Now, many of you know I'm not a morning person. And his classes all started at 8:30. And I was off campus. It was a half-hour walk. So that meant I had to get up about 7 o'clock. But I made them all, because he was a great motivator, and then we became friends, and I just couldn't let him down. I was also his graduate assistant. So finished the coursework, everything fine. Writing the thesis, about 70% done. I can't do this anymore. I need a break. So I told him, I'm going to go. I have an opportunity to go to Mexico for a week, and what do you think? Okay. And the opportunity came up because my roommate and I were living in a guest house on the grounds of a Mexican family. And their son, Rene, was an architect. And he was restoring homes in Alamos, Sonora, Mexico. And it's about a day's drive from Tucson to Alamos. So it's a wonderful little village. At that time, it was laid back, sleepy. Claim to fame was in the colonial era with the silver mining. And there were these big mansions. And then when the silver mines were exhausted, the people left. And so there were a lot of big homes not being used or refurbished. So he had a long career down there restoring. And in fact, there was a book out on the architecture of Alamos, and many of his homes that he restored were featured in it. So he said, I'm restoring this big house, and the little house is ready for you to live in, so come on down. Okay. So we got there. It wasn't quite ready, so they put us up in a hotel. And there was one hotel in town, and basically no tourism, because people just came to visit who had lived there, and few business, because it was off the beaten path. But anyway, all I remember is these big double doors. Usually they were open. So we came home, the first night we were out partying, came back, and we pushed. Didn't open. So then we both got, and then we heard this creak, bang, ouch. And what had happened was, their security, they had put a cot horizontal to the double doors, and one of the staff would sleep on the cot. And so nobody came in after 10 o'clock. I mean, it was like here, everything died at 9:10. So this was highly unusual. Anyway, we made it through the hotel. Casita was ready. We moved in. Now, my idea of a casita was not what this was. It was more of a caretaker's house. It was long and narrow. And one night, getting ready for bed, we heard footsteps on the roof. And we thought, I said, I'm not staying here. I'm getting out. The door was at this end. So when we heard footsteps at this end, we both left. She grabbed the iron as a weapon. We went in the car and went over to Renee's house. Now, it's quiet, dark. So we're calling, Renee. Of course, nothing. And we throw pebbles at the window. And he finally opens it and gives a, what the hell? So we got in. He said, oh, you girls are dreaming. I said, we both couldn't have the same dream. And anyway, he posted a guard there, so it was okay. So now towards the end of this stay, a runner came from the hotel with a note saying, call Senior Munsinger. There was one working, reliable hotel phone line in the hotel, and they would send runners. The homes, this was before cell phones, the homes also had houseboys, and they would send the runners. So I went, talked to him, and it was like, get your tail back here or you're not going to graduate. Okay, so we said the next day. Then we were advised there are hurricane watches up for Mazatlan, which is about 400 miles south of where we were. And we thought, well, maybe we should start. So we got 150 miles or so, and it was getting dark and windy, and so we knew Guaymas. We knew a hotel there, so we said, we better stay there for the night. So we did. We met some other Americans, went out to dinner because there was nothing to eat in the hotel, and it was pretty windy now. So we're in the restaurant eating, drinking margaritas, just having a gay old time, not worrying about any hurricane. And finally, all the lights went out, and the staff came with candles. And they said, you better get back to the hotel because we're in a hurricane warning now, and it's imminent. So, okay, we opened the doors, and this is what we found. So we're holding hands in a conga line, making our way back to the hotel. And everything turned out fine. I got back, I graduated, and now it's on to the next career. I told Munsinger, I said, it was just so much fun, I'd like to go on for another degree with you. He said, no, I have the perfect job for you. He was consulting to the Secretary of Commerce in Washington and said that his job was to structure the agency and then recommend staffing. So he had a research office, and he said, I have just the person to staff it. Okay, it was developed, it was created by the 1961 International Travel Act, and its job was to promote foreign travel to the U.S. for foreign exchange earnings to help reduce the balance of payments. There was a big travel deficit, meaning so many more Americans went out than foreign visitors came here. So we had offices in 6 countries, and there was a convention office to encourage companies to hold their conventions in the U.S. There was a state liaison office to work with the states and cities because they supplied the brochures that we sent abroad to these offices that really dealt with the travel trade and also the public to inform them about all the benefits of visiting the U.S. So I said, okay, I will start this research office. Oh, and then we also had a travel advisory board made up of segments of the travel industry. And I know we had the head of Disney, and we had Peter Ubroth, who was just a gem, and then the vice president of research for American Airlines, whom I got to know pretty well. So here I am starting the research office, and there's a wealth of unused data. And the primary source of secondary information was from INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service, and it's called an I-94 form. And all foreign visitors have to fill it out. And so on there was their address in the foreign country, the length of stay, where they stayed in the U.S., how long they stayed, what they spent, and where they visited. So we just processed that information, and I made, colorful charts and graphs and little paragraphs. And then our assistant secretary, we were not a bureaucratic agency. We were promotional in spirit and also in staffing. And our assistant secretary of Commerce for Tourism was a promoter from the get-go. He would make Barnum and Bailey, they would pale in comparison to him. And he had all these schemes, they called it. But he was very low-keyed, very likable, and he usually got his way. So these were just some of the promotional things. Now, his claim to fame was they called it the balloon. It was a 6-story inflatable balloon theater. And inside it, there was the Disney America the Beautiful 360-degree film. There were the brochures from all the states and cities. We had drawings to get, obviously, names of people, but they were awarded either hotel nights or British Airways gave them a trip Now the problem, and this was carted around to all the countries where we had offices. And the problem was they said, well, how are you going to get it there? Oh, I know Cap Weinberger. He was head of OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and he's going to get me a cargo plane. So this is a C-5A, and it was deflated, put in there, and traveled around. Now, this really was a master's stroke because the free publicity we got from the media and the TV was phenomenal. I mean, it was really an event. So that was going well, and that was about the end of his term, and he said, one more place I want to take it, to Moscow. We were having trade talks with the Russian. He thought that would be a natural tie-in. And he said, did I want to go? I said, oh, sure. So there I am, strapped in the back, no windows in the back. And everything's going fine. We're over Helsinki, and all of a sudden the radio starts crackling. There's Russian, there's English, there's shouting and yelling. So I get up to see what's going on, and there are 2 Russian fighter jets on each side of us. It seemed like someone forgot to inform Moscow that we were coming. So all they saw was this unauthorized U.S. military plane in their airspace, but it got straightened out. Now, we had a constant battle with Congress on the appropriateness of this agency. It's not a government function, and we don't have funding to do promotion. That's private industry activity. So under Kennedy and Nixon, those were the good days. Nixon particularly. That's when I did a lot of research and studies on foreign travelers to the U.S., habits, all that. And our budget increased. Then under Johnson, well, not so good, but no cuts. Then Carter came, and no need for this, no need. So the handwriting was on the wall, and I decided, I think it's time I move on. Earl Ditmars on our travel advisory board, who was the person, came up to me and said, now we're moving our headquarters to Dallas. All of my staff isn't coming. Do you want to come? And I thought about it. Okay, Joy, what do I do here? Here we go. So I thought about it, and I said, yes. This one when the TV show was popular, and JR, so I was going to meet JR. All right, so after that, I joined American Airlines, and the first job was working for Earl Ditmars in research, traffic, and forecasting. And then he said, now, to move ahead in the company, you have to go to all different departments to kind of zigzag up. Okay, he said, I'll get you the first job, and then it's up to you. So he found one in route planning. And that's where hubs were coming into existence. And the question was, we had a small hub in Nashville, and then we wanted to start a bigger one in Raleigh-Durham because of the research triangle and the connections with Austin and Silicon Valley. So I was to investigate that, and of course I came back. Raleigh-Durham was the place to be. So we still served Nashville, but not as the hub. And then I went to pricing, and then I went to capacity planning, and then marketing. And here was, I dealt with the frequent flyers and did surveys, and some of you may have gotten a question on board the aircraft, and that was kind of my doing. And then HR, I would go recruiting at college campuses. And then the fun thing was I was trained to be a substitute flight attendant, because when the flight attendants went out on strike, management was going to take over. Well, I was ready, and they came back, so I never went. Now, the plum job, because it reported directly to the CEO, Bob Crandall, who was a visionary genius and all of the superlatives. And so I lobbied hard for that. I mean, I pulled out all the stops, and I got it. Okay. And he took a keen interest in the financial community, and they respected him, probably more than other CEOs, other airline CEOs. And so my job was to present the information to the analysts and present what we did in the best possible light. So we had 2 categories, buy side and sell side. Sell side were the easy ones. Those were the ones that wrote the reports for the retail trade to buy the stock, and they would come up with estimates. Their goal was to come up with the earnings estimate quarterly, earnings per share, and buy, sell, hold. And basically income statement oriented. I figured out what their algorithm was and duplicated it, and so I laid them. They liked what I did. In fact, they voted me Best Outstanding Airline Analyst in '89, which I was proud of. And then the buy side, I dreaded those. That was Fidelity, Vanguard, and they would invest in the company to have their stock in their funds. And it was grueling. I mean, line by line, we went through the balance sheet, the income statement, and they were 2 and 3 hours, but I guess I did okay because I lasted there 3 years. And then they said, okay, it's time to go. You've been here long enough, let somebody else take over. All right. So with my background dealing with the financial community and all the other airline people, and my modeling experience, I said, well, what about doing industry forecast, demand forecast 5 and 10 years out for air travel. And we knew the market, but it was always kind of after the fact and no long-range planning. So they thought that was pretty good. And then I said, I have some issues that maybe we should investigate in conjunction with that. And yeah, and they added some. So this is basically what I looked at. Business pleasure was important for aircraft configuration and size. Business travelers more frequency, which would mean smaller aircraft. Key issues at that time, the teleconferencing was just coming popular, and they thought that would eat into the business travel, but it didn't. And then analyzing new entrants was another fun one. This was Southwest was coming on the scene. And in looking at them all, I said Southwest was probably going to be a major competitor. And now they are ranked among the big 4. In fact, they're number 3 in passenger service. And then identifying weak and strong international carriers for who we want a marketing agreement with. So that was fun, and I did that for 5 years because nobody else was available to do that. And then Americans started cost cutting. And they wanted to get rid of the high-paid executives. So there was a very lucrative package that I took. And then I get this call from Crandall. You don't really want to do this. Yes, I do. And so we talked about it, and I came back as a consultant for 7 years. Now, the one thing I failed to mention was early on when I was doing this job, Wall Street, after a month, I was to write Crandall's speech before the entire financial community at the World Trade Center in New York. It is a big deal. So I looked at past efforts of my predecessor and did bullet points. I mean, because you can't write a speech for Crandall. And I submitted it to the VP of Finance. And he said, nah, don't like it. I'll rewrite it. You're not here long enough. You don't know Crandall like I do. I'll write it. Okay. And I was to take the speech to Philadelphia, stay overnight in the hotel, leave it at the desk. Crandall would be coming in. We'd take the train down to New York the next day. Okay, I get another call. Beverly, come to my suite. We have to rewrite this. Okay, so he did. And I get there, and he was a chain smoker, just blue haze. I go in, I sit by the table, he's writing, and I said, okay, what can I do? Okay, so I sat there. About 10 minutes later, I said, how can I help? All right, so I just sat there. He finally said, well, we're done now. And he called Durham in New York and said, Beverly's coming down on the train in a couple hours. Meet her and have typists in at the office and type this up and then go to the Trade Center. Okay. Well, so I'm dozing. Well, first of all, the train depot at 5:30 in the morning is not the most pleasant environment, but I stepped over the bodies and made it. And I'm dozing, and all of a sudden I'm jarred awake, and the announcer came on and says, we're in the Holland Tunnel. There's a train wreck ahead. We're going to be delayed in at least an hour and a half. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be fired. First I didn't write the speech right, and now I'm going to get there on time. Well, I got there about 8:45. Durham was there, went off, got it all done, and everything was fine. All right, so now it's time to play. I decide, since I did a lot of planning, I'm going to do myself a 10-year travel plan. And I'm just going to go a few excerpts from 2 trips, 2 major trips. And one was a world cruise, and left from San Francisco, Hawaii, and through the islands over to Australia and New Zealand. And this was in the Kingdom of Tonga. And this lady was an aide to the king, and she introduced me to the king, and she had this necklace on that I have now because I admired it, and she gave it to me and said, here. I thought, oh my goodness. And then she insisted I dance with the tango dancers. So somebody took a video of it, but I don't have it. And then we have the animal encounters. For me, that was special, feeding the kangaroos in Australia, up close to the koalas. Now, you just have to smile when you see these little koalas. They're so cute and cuddly. And then riding the elephants in Malaysia. Now, this was a big elephant. And we were upstairs, had to get upstairs to get on top. And the guide said, this is a semi-retired elephant, but he still works in the rubber tree forest, so I want to take him through there just to refresh. I thought, oh, okay. So now we're high up, and we're in the trees with the leaves, and we're brushing them away, and the path is going up and down and around the side, and I'm saying to myself, now I'm told elephants have memories, and they're sure-footed, so just relax and enjoy it. And I did, and it was great. Then the camel ride came in the UAE. This was a smelly, dirty, spitty, turn on, spit all the time at me. And I'm trotting along, bouncing along, and then he would stop. And then we would go and then stop. And I finally said, help. So the handler came and took us back and gave me a drink. Now this was a thrill for me. There was a chance to go up with a charter aircraft, a pilot, over the Nangaloo Reef in the west coast of Australia. The reef isn't that much, but this was great. So I went to the airstrip and the hangar and signed dozens of waivers, and in so talking to him, and I explained that I worked for American Airlines and did simulator training, and I've always wanted to take flying lessons. So we go up, and it's so beautiful. I could care less about the reef. I was just looking at the sky and the scenery. And he said, well, why don't you want to take the controls? And I said, oh. He said, go ahead, I'll have my hands on the wheel, so go ahead. So I did, and I was really tense. But then I started to relax, and it just was so wonderful. And I did a double take and saw his hands weren't on the wheel anymore. And I jerked it, and I guess we did a dive down, and he quickly corrected, so everything was fine. Now here, this was the ship on the World Cruise, the Silver Whisper on the Silver Sea Line, and they had hoses, big fire hoses outlined all around the top deck because we were going into the Gulf of Aden where there was pirates. This was Pirates Alley at the time. And he said, not to worry, we can outrun them. They usually go cargo ships and so on and so forth. So we had some briefings. We had to go down to the bottom, no windows if we were breached, but nothing happened. So he said, now I'm gonna flat this out. We're gonna go speeding like you've never sped before on a cruise ship when we go around there. So he alerted us, and someone said we were going 29, 30 knots, I don't know, but it was like being on one of those jet boats. The water was flashing up, and we got through, no problem. Darn. Then Valley of the Kings. Now, I'm partial to Egypt, Egyptology. I think at one time I wanted to be in archaeology. So these were the tombs, and the one tomb that's very impressive that everybody takes you to is Seti I, who is the son, this was the inside, and these are some of the chambers. He was the son of Ramses I, and that's the one that has all these big statues of himself all over Egypt and the Nile. And it's 460 feet down. A lot of stairs, but there are platforms to go. There are 11 chambers, so you could go off to the side and look, and then come back. And there are so far they have they have found 62 tombs, and this was KV 17, meaning it was the 17th tomb uncovered. Now the guide said, "Okay, you've seen what's ready for tourists. Do you want to see one that we're excavating?" Oh, sure. 6 of us said yes. So we went to this hole in the ground, and he said, now it's pretty rugged, but you look able-bodied. Well, it's a path with some rungs across every now and then. No railing, just a wall to hang on to. No lights. There was a flashlight, the lead guy, and a flashlight for the back guy. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden, we have to bend down and walk the rest of the way this way because the ceiling wasn't raised yet. And I'm thinking, But we get down there, we only stayed a short time. The idea was to see the chamber and the tomb and the workers working on the walls. So going up, I said, you go, I'll go ahead because I'm going to be really slow. And in fact, I was doing all fours, crawling up till I could stand up. And I remember getting out in the daylight, standing up and saying, I did it, I did it. And they all said, yes, yes, you did it. Now, here is another really special time. Next was Alexandria, and I'm a fan of Cleopatra and the pharaohs, and she was the last pharaoh. And they're still searching for her gravesite. And there's one lady called Kathleen Martinez from the Dominican Republic, and she's been trying to find her tomb for the last 20 years. The last 10 years, she's been excavating at Tapiceras Magnum. And it's been written up in National Geographic magazines, if you've read it, and there have been TV specials on, Secrets of Egypt. In fact, just recently, there was one on her work. So I said, I got to go there. There's just no question about it. I got to get there. Well, the concierge said, they tried for days. No, it's a closed site. It's an active dig, no tourists. I said, oh. So I said, all right, how about a cab? I just want to go there, be on the outside, see it, close up. All right, so the day before we get into Alexandria, they call me down and they say, you'll never believe it. One of the archaeologists was on leave that day, and word got around that this crazy American lady just had to see Tapiceras Magnum. He said, I'll take her. So he came with a driver, and we went inside, and so here I am, walking on the very ground that maybe Cleopatra walked on. Oh. And there were pottery shards. And I was looking at him, and he said, those are rejects, so if you want one, take one. So I did, and I'm going to have a pendant made, but I haven't done that yet. Okay, now on to Antarctica. Now, let me get to my notes here, a little bit about Antarctica. It's the coldest, windiest, highest, driest continent on Earth. And the average temperatures are minus 80 to minus 135. And the ice thickness ranges from 6,500 feet to 18,000 feet. And the peninsula is where most people say, when they go into Antarctica, that's where they've been. And when I went there, 20 years ago, it wasn't on any cruise ship itinerary. There were just small expedition ships. And now I was looking, it's basically on every cruise ship itinerary. And I just hope that they preserve the environment like the treaty says. There's a treaty of about 38 countries, and there can be no one owns Antarctica, no military activity, no nuclear testing, no mineral exploration, and all scientific discoveries have to be shared. And very strict rules about preserving the environment. So when we went ashore, we had to sanitize our boots in a pan of disinfectant before we stepped on shore. Now, South Georgia is another one on the cruise ship itinerary. And that, as you see, is not Antarctic. It's a sub-Antarctic island. And there are many down here. I don't know if you can see this, but there's McGuire and the Snares, and those are owned by New Zealand. And the penguins, let's see, the one to point out the Ross Sea. This is where we came from, New Zealand up and through here. And this is the Ross ice shelf. And most of the huts were located around here before they went in to explore the continent. And the age of exploration was in the early 1900s. And they were mapping the continent. They didn't know it was the continent at first. The weather conditions, the geology, all the scientific discoveries. And Scott was known, Captain Robert Falcon Scott was known for that. So, what's next? Well, let me go back. South Georgia is known for basically two things. Shackleton, when his ship, the Endurance, was crushed in the ice, he saved all his men in boats and rations, and they went over to Elephant Island, where he left most of the men took a small party, rowed to South Georgia, where he was got help, and so all his men were saved, and that's when he became famous for saving all the men and never losing a man in subsequent expeditions. And the other thing it's known for is the largest colony of king penguins, 250,000 breeding pairs of king penguins, which was an awesome sight to say the least. So started the 35-day journey from New Zealand. Oh, now there are 18 species of penguins, but only 4 indigenous to Antarctica per se. The Adelie, the Gentoo, and the chinstrap, and those you find on the peninsula. The emperors are mainly south, and they all have a different personality. The chinstraps loved to be photographed, it seemed. The Adelies were workers taking pebbles. Their nests were made of pebbles, so they would go collect a pebble in their beak, come back, drop it off, go back and forth, back and forth. So we started the journey from New Zealand, Littleton, New Zealand, just like my famous explorers, on a Russian icebreaker, the Captain Klebnikov. And its usual port was in the North Seas for oil exploration to break up the ice. But when oil prices dropped, it wasn't needed, so Cork Expeditions contracted with the Russian government and came into passenger service. So you can imagine, it's not a cruise ship by any stretch of the imagination. But what's unique about an icebreaker is it has a rounded keel, so there's nothing to protrude to break off and hurt the ship. So it's not meant to go in open waters, but to get from New Zealand to the ice, it was 12 days in open waters. And so we're rocking and rolling and pitching, but there were about 85 people, all like-minded, all had been to the Antarctic, and experienced travelers, so everybody was fine. But we had this was my cabin, and here was the bunk. So when it got really bad one night, I put pillows here, flexed the knees, because I would be thrown here, pillows behind my head, and thrown back, so it was back and forth most of the night. And we knew it was going to be bad because the staff would pour jugs of water on the tablecloths for dinner so that the utensils and plates would adhere. Anyway, we finally made it to the ice. Made it to, and so we knew travel to the continent was imminent because they're putting the blades on the helicopter. There were 2 helicopters on board this icebreaker. And this is Cape Evans, which is my hero, Captain Robert Falcon Scott's, one of his 2 huts. The last hut he used on his fatal, quote, race to the South Pole was a misnomer. It was coined by the media. It never was started out as a race. But that's a whole nother story that I can't go into now. But anyway, we got there, and all the explorers had to cross the Ross ice shelf. This is as large as the country of France, 600 miles wide, 165 feet high, and 90% of it is below the ocean. And it melts and it freezes, it melts and it freezes. So it's not, this shows that it's sheer, but it's not. There's lots of little indentations. In fact, the British call it the crevasses. And this was a problem for the explorers. So we get to Cape Evans, helicoptered over there. This was Scott's hut. Huts were the name they used, but we would call them lodges because this housed 25 men. And here, this was just goosebumps because on the black and white picture is Scott at his famous birthday party. And then here is the table, the same table that I took when I went there. And I mean, to touch the same table that Scott did, I thought, oh, well, this is so exciting. And then because it's so cold and dry, everything is preserved. So all of the stores, they called it, all the food supplies are there. The Antarctic Trust is the task of preserving it and cataloging it. And so they just did a cleaning up, and then there are lots of boxes and cartons outside the huts stacked high with peas and beans and sugar and salt, etc. So then the next voyage was to see the Adelie penguins. Now here, before you go to shore to the penguins, the staff goes aboard, sets up where a helicopter can land. We have to be at least 1.5 miles from a penguin colony, and then sets up a tent with the radio and emergency rations, and then they mark the trail. Okay, it was a bright sunny day. We were the first. This time they went by cabin numbers on who goes first, second, third, etc. So I was first. Got off, walk in the 1.5 miles, and get almost there when a blizzard comes up. That's what's going on here. And the ship's horn is honking, the guides' whistles are blowing, and they said, hurry up, get back to the helicopter, or we'll be stranded here. So we did, and it was a really bumpy ride back, but we made it, everything was fine. Then the next excursion, which I didn't think much of, but the crew was so excited because rarely people get to this because of the winds, called the dry valleys. And the winds average at least 40 miles an hour, so helicopter landings are iffy. And it goes up to 200 miles an hour. But this day was basically calm. So we got to land, and it just was barren and inhospitable, and our geologist was in seventh heaven because he was telling us all about the rocks. And then the petrified seals because there's no rain, and it's dry and cold. Then the next thing, the last thing, are my friends, the emperors. Now here, this was on Franklin Island in the Ross Sea. And because it was all frozen, you didn't know you were on an island. You just thought it was a continuation of the ice. And this was a 2-mile trek from the helicopter. And this path was not very friendly. There was about 2 inches of snow covering ice, but at times the snow would be 2 and 3 feet deep, so you would sink down. And I sank down to my knees so many times. And we had clamp-ons on our boots, but most people made the 2-mile trek in about an hour. I took almost an hour and 45 minutes because I kept falling down. So got there and just sat down on the snow and just absorbed the scene, just kind of meditated with my friends, the penguins, the emperors. And then it started snowing, so it added to the atmosphere. Oh, it was just perfect. And then I'm sitting there and I'm looking, and all of a sudden, this little guy comes waddling up, and then he stops. And then he waddles some more, and then he stops, and then he looks back, and then he waddles some more. And now he's getting pretty close, so I start talking to him, hello, Mr. Penguin, are you coming? The usual chit-chat. And he gets about 4 feet from me, and I'm thinking, ooh, he's gonna come right up to me. Well, no. His parents were watching the whole time, and now they were squawking, and that was the call for him to turn around and come back. But that was exciting. So after 5 hours, it was time to leave. Made the trek back, and there you have it. And I hope to be back to see my penguins. The end.
Any questions?
No questions.
Any questions on Beverly?
It's time for a drink.
No questions?
No questions.
Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you all for coming.
Next month, second Monday, we have Brock Riley, who was president of American Bridge Company, who has been speaking. American Bridge Company built the Verrazano Bridge, the Tappan Zee Bridge, and the Empire State Building. So it's going to be a wonderful program. We hope to see you there.
Oh, I got to take off my stuff.
Have a nice night and enjoy dinner. Thank you.